Most people overpay for car insurance, not because they're careless, but because switching feels like too much hassle. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.
Most of us are one good deal away from finally replacing that worn-out rug, fixing up the backyard, or getting the bedroom we actually want. Good news, that deal's almost here. Wayfair's Black Friday and July sale. Get up to 80% off area rugs and up to 60% off outdoor and bedroom furniture. Shop Wayfair's huge selection of styles and find the piece to fit your style, budget, and space. Plus, free shipping. Black Friday in July ends July 27th. Shop today at wayfair.com.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Roughly 20 veterans die by suicide every single day. Canines for Warriors has been the nation's leading nonprofit organization, providing service dogs for veterans battling PTSD and other invisible wounds of war.
Thanks to my service dog, Lady Cameo, I got my life back.
I'm able to get out of bed in the morning.
Be excited, happy about today.
To learn more, visit caninesforwarriors.org. That's caninesforwarriors.org.
Before I switched to Wealthfront, my APY was probably 0.1.
Once I switched to Ching.
With the Wealthfront Cash account, earn up to 4.2% APY on your cash.
I can trust Wealthfront is taking care of me.
Make your money earn more. Get started at wealthfront.com. Clients were paid $1,000 for their testimonials, creating a conflict of interest. Outcomes vary. 3.3% base APY as of January 30th, 2026 is representative, variable, and earned on funds swept to program banks. 0.65% new client boost for 3 months on up to $150,000. Direct deposit $1,000 a month and fund an investing account for a 0.25% increase. Cash account offered by Wealthfront Brokerage LLC, member FINRA SIPC, not a bank.
I was injured in a construction accident here in New York, and I was put out of work. It hurt not being able to support those who needed me. But luckily, the Bull took charge of my case and won big. He got me over $5.5 million and put my life back on track. Now I can live with my feet propped up without them being in a cast. Thanks, Mike.
When I win big for my clients like this, I'm ecstatic for them, but I'm never surprised. I do it time and again. That's just how I roll. Hi, everyone. Michael the Bull Amitsoff here, one of New York's top personal injury and construction accident attorneys. There's nothing that makes me happier than seeing the smiles on my clients' faces, especially when I hand them a multi-million-dollar check and welcome them into the Bulls Millionaires Club. If you're injured in a construction accident or in any other type of accident, I'll fight to get you the highest possible award. Call me, dial pound 250 on your phone and say, The Bull. That's pound 250 and say, The Bull. Or visit me at michaelthebull.com. And remember, if you mess with the bull, you get the horns.
Welcome to episode 144 of the Sisters in Loss podcast. As I know many of you are at home, whether you are quarantined because you're a non-essential worker, whether you are an essential worker and you're actually having to go out to work and be amongst people as we fight off this COVID-19 coronavirus, not only in the U.S., but worldwide. I hope that this series of podcast episodes during Fertility Awareness Month and National Infertility Awareness Week, which is later on in the month, will help bring you a sense of joy, peace, and calm, and remove any anxieties and fears that you may be having as we have no place to go. So hopefully this brings some joy to your ears as you go through your own journey to motherhood, whether it was you push play on it during this coronavirus pandemic, you put pause on it for right now, and you are regrouping, you are going through your own personal self-care routine to get back to a place and a sense of calm so that you can approach this next season, this new season that we're all in, a little bit differently, and that we all get back to a place of a new normal. In today's episode, I sit down with Dr. Loree Johnson. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist with more than 25 years experience as a clinician, educator, and clinical supervisor. So she helps clients with uncertainty in their relationships, overcome the emotional challenges that come with fertility problems and challenges, and the loss of a pregnancy, and to help strengthen their relationships. She uses a very holistic and therapeutic approach. And in this episode, Dr. Loree goes back and shares her own personal journey. Yes, even though she is a licensed therapist and this is what she does, she tells us the journey behind why she became licensed to do what she does. And she takes us on her own journey to motherhood and her own fertility challenges. And I think that you all would get some more hope and joy understanding exactly the thoughts behind this, and definitely from a therapist's ear as she shares her own experience. So without further ado, here's Dr. Loree Johnson.
Well, thank you, Dr. Loree, for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'd like for you to share in your own words a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay. So my name is Dr. Loree Johnson. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist who works in private practice primarily, and I have 2 office locations in the Los Angeles metropolitan area, but most recently I've definitely been working a lot with people who are dealing with fertility issues and struggling with pregnancy loss, who are dealing with pregnancy issue losses in a lot of different ways.
Yes. So tell us how you got into this work and just share with us your journey.
So, I always feel like, we find the work that really needs us. And, I've started doing a lot of work around women or working with women who struggled with pregnancy loss because of my own situation. I have been dealing with fertility issues for probably the past 6 years and suffered 4 pregnancy losses within that time. And I think just having this unique perspective of going through this journey and also being a clinician really helps me kind of see that I have, just a lot to share with other women who are going through this. Nobody asks to be a part of this club and, but suddenly we find ourselves here and, we kind of find our sense of purpose and a way of just providing that support in ways that we needed. And so I think that's really informed how I work and just also my decision to really share more about my story.
Yeah. So take us back on your journey to your motherhood and share with us your long story.
So, I got married about 7 years ago and, I'd never been pregnant and I hadn't really worried about, getting pregnant. I just figured that, once I found the right person, then when we settled in as a couple, then we would decide, to have children when we were ready. And obviously God had another plan in place for us. And so it was probably about 6 months into our marriage where I finally decided, let's go ahead and start trying. And I got pregnant, relatively easily. And sadly, that pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. My body was still thought it was pregnant, but I was producing pregnancy hormones. But unfortunately, there was no heartbeat. And so at 8 weeks, we kind of discovered that loss and, and had to kind of mourn that. And that was my first introduction into pregnancy loss. I'd heard about, people having miscarriages and, I had friends who had experienced miscarriages, but, it hadn't really happened to me, obviously. And so I went through this period of shock, disbelief, and obviously intense sadness. And, so the next few months really, I spent just really trying to heal from that and, just really getting my footing again. And so probably about a year later, I decided, I was ready. My body was ready. My doctor felt like I was in a good space to start to try to conceive again. And then we got pregnant again naturally and relatively easily. And so I was really excited, but then I had this newfound anxiety because of the previous loss. So I was nervous because I had some spotting going on and I was, I knew that was a symptom of, potential symptom of miscarriage, but, it was just that little being who was just burrowing in. And, so this was part of the first trimester where things are always really tentative and scary. And, so I spent the first trimester really being in this stage of fear, worrying I was going to lose this baby the same way that I had lost the the last one. And so every little milestone, every week that I was pregnant was just another testament to getting further along in this pregnancy and feeling more relieved that, okay, here was my chance to finally become a mother. And I went to my first trimester or the end of my first trimester screening appointment, and everything looked fine. The doctor said, we're going to do some, some tests, just the first trimester screening test just to be on the safe side, but, everything looks good. So I, was starting to celebrate. We were starting to, tell people that I was pregnant because we'd made it past all of these milestones before that we hadn't made it to. And then that's when we learned that something was wrong with our son about a week later into my 13th week. And so, to kind of get, poor fetal diagnosis and, learn that our child had some chromosomal issues. And so we had to kind of settle into that diagnosis, which, we were prepared for to kind of deal with whatever came, but and then I went for my screening and everything was fine with the screening. We saw the baby at that nuchal translucent scan that most women that are of advanced age kind of go through. And then, sadly after that, our baby passed away. And so that was probably the most significant loss that we had experienced, kind of preparing for, a child that was going to have, special needs. And then, unfortunately, I think God had other plans for our child. And so after that, I really went into this really different kind of dark place because I wasn't really anticipating, the second loss and then to have these diagnoses floating around that, we hadn't really, we knew that there was a higher, chance of that happening, but still, we were hopeful. And to have those hopes dashed in such a powerful way was just, heartbreaking. And so I think after that, we took some time to just kind of regroup. We started traveling a little bit, and that became kind of our solace and a way for us to get away from a lot of the heaviness around the loss, just because I don't think I was prepared for that. We don't, and I think when we're in our 20s and our 30s and we're really preparing for parenthood and we think about getting married, we don't really think about the losses and that go along with this journey. And so I think my husband and I really had some adjusting to do, in a way that, we've definitely kind of gotten through it, but it was powerful. And so we traveled a bit and, then we went through the whole IVF journey because at that stage I was at a point where the doctors were saying, you are of advanced maternal age, a term that I don't think any woman really wants to hear because of all of the messages that go along with that. And so they basically said, you know what, you need to go straight to IVF. And even though I'd had 2 natural pregnancies and I'd gotten pregnant relatively easily, I followed my doctor's advice and we started IVF. And so IVF was definitely an experience in and of itself. I did probably about 4 different cycles, and that resulted in one was a failed cycle and, with no pregnancy. And then the second transfer that we had that came from, 4 months of egg retrieval ended in what they call a chemical pregnancy. So probably that was about a year and a half of treatments. And then after that, and three pregnancy losses in, I told my husband, you know what, I really need a break. I think our relationship needed a break to regroup. And we just decided that we were going to just focus on us for a while. And we started what I now call our grief tour, which was every time I always can tell how I was feeling at certain trips that we were taking, because every trip that we took was really in response to a period of intense sadness that I was feeling. And, and our together time, our travel time really became, some time away from all of the disappointment that became so characteristic of just being in our house and, being in our world and our circle, even though we had a wonderful community of people that was supportive, of us. We just didn't want that narrative really coming out in our relationship. And and really impacting us in negative ways that we've seen, happen with many other couples who are struggling with fertility issues. So we embarked on our grief tour and started traveling quite frequently. And then after, one of these trips, I started noticing those familiar signs that I think every woman notices when she's feeling pregnant. And as it turns out, I was pregnant for, a fourth time. And what made that pregnancy, I think just that much more special was because by that point, after all of my treatments and really thinking, what, IVF didn't work for us. We need to think about other options, including continuing to travel, including trying to try naturally. My doctor had let me know that my tubes were blocked. So here I was with this, additional diagnosis of, unexplained infertility, advanced maternal age. And then on top of that, almost complete tubal blockage. And so I remember looking at the test and when they performed it and saw that, both of my tubes one was fully blocked and one was almost completely blocked. And, and somehow I still got pregnant. And after that, and so, unfortunately that pregnancy ended in another miscarriage, but it still changed things. It registered differently than others. And so even though I'd gone through all of this, kind of medical intervention and, being told certain narratives about what was going to happen or not, things still happened. And so that's, I had these glimpses of hope and kind of interspersed with these moments of, heartbreak and loss. So that's kind of my journey through loss in a nutshell.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp.com. That is better, HELP.com. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your personal goals? BetterHelp will assist your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 24 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's counselor network, which may not be locally available in many areas. This service is available for clients worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message directly to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions so you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit their website at betterhelp.com/sisters. That's better, HELP, and join the over 500,000 people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. There's a special offer for our listeners. For Sisters in Loss listeners, get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/sisters. I am so excited for you all to tune in to BetterHelp, as I've been using it for the last 4 weeks, and I absolutely love the counselor that I was matched with. You can also choose a counselor that specifically works with African American patients or is African American themselves, especially if you're looking for someone who can relate to your cultural experiences as you're going through grief, loss, and healing. Once again, the website to get 10% off is betterhelp.com/sisters, betterhelp.com/sisters.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So take us on the grieving process of your journey. You are a therapist, so I know you know the importance of therapy. Had you started to seek counsel after your first loss, and then how did you do it after you had those subsequent losses? How did you begin to grieve and, continue to go through IVF? Because IVF in itself, that whole fertility process is a grieving process, because it's always, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So take us on that journey.
So, I absolutely did have support with, having my own therapist and space with that. I did actually probably switch therapists in between, just because, for the reason that you mentioned, going through IVF is a journey in and of itself. And so while at one point I had a therapist who knew me for a while, we worked for many years. I did switch because I really needed at that time someone who understood the IVF world a little bit more and could kind of be further along in that journey than I was. And so, so I did, I think weave in and out of therapy and shift working with, from one therapist to another, because what was so important for me is that, even though I do, I'm trained to kind of hold that space for others, I needed that space held for me. And at least I had, I think, the presence to know when there were certain limitations happening in my own therapy. Even though I had a great relationship with this therapist, I had a sense of what I needed and how that shifted based on where I was in that journey. And so again, grieving, the grieving process for me as a clinician, but also most importantly as a mother, has been about really honoring what I've needed and how that's changed over time. And to make sure that I honor those changes that needed to happen, instead of feeling badly about it. Because sometimes we tend to stay in certain situations that aren't necessarily working for us. And, but I think I that was one thing that I did really well, because of, my background and knowing, hey, I this is what I need right now, to process this. And I'm outside of my scope and outside of my comfort level. And I need some guidance in this. And, even though sometimes people are coming to me for the answers in the space, I just needed to have a place to land, so to speak, and to get that same support that I kind of offer others. And so my therapy was just so powerful. And then also, in addition to having my therapist on hand as part of my healing process, I had a tribe that I built of women within the pregnancy loss community, but also women who were outside of the pregnancy loss community, which I felt like I needed to, because, it was just, I needed ways to manage the heaviness, because of my profession. And I think, I'm constantly and joyfully, holding space for others, but also needing a little bit of lightness from time to time. And so that's where I think a lot of my friends outside of the community who weren't really attached to the loss, but they knew of it, but these were women who were thriving in their own right. And so they became a touchstone of what life looked like outside of loss, as a way of, just trying to navigate what that could look like for me. And so I really melded that with, the experiences that I had with the women within my pregnancy loss community. So it was other mothers, obviously, who had lost their children, and it was other therapists in particular who had lost their children. And I was paying, close attention to how they navigated their journeys and managing their grief with also providing space for others, because that is a unique challenge, I think, when you are a therapist and you're suffering from miscarriage or, pregnancy loss due to poor fetal diagnosis, or, other women that I learned that, were undergoing, really heartbreaking choices that, they call like a termination for medical reasons, which is a whole nother kind of community in and of itself. So, I think that I just really combined a lot of these different experiences to craft a process and journey that really felt meaningful for me.
I love that. I love that you had a community of people inside who understood, and then those who are outside that knew how to be a support of you throughout your journey. So you mentioned about the folks that are in the community. Are there any tools or resources that you use to help you on your healing journey?
So I have to say the resources that are available now were not as readily available then. So I just have to say I'm really loving what social media has done to connect the pregnancy loss community. So I feel like I just woke up and I just saw like all of these profiles and accounts that were geared towards women who have lost their babies, and there was a way that we were able to connect that, even though I had this on Facebook probably about starting 6 years ago, it feels qualitatively different now. So, I know social media gets a bad rap for a lot of things, but for this, I think it's been, a really wonderful resource. And I really encourage a lot of my clients, to seek support in numerous ways. Another way that I sought support, was through Facebook initially, and looking for pregnancy loss groups. And when I was a part of those groups, I actually asked for if there were other women who were therapists who had suffered pregnancy losses. And so that's how I really learned to kind of connect to other therapists going through this journey. And that helped me not feel so alone. I also reached out to Resolve and started attending one of their support groups in my area. And luckily at the time, that group was led by another therapist who had struggled with, fertility issues. So that became another place where and tool or resource, that I could draw from. But I think the most important tool or strategies that I learned for navigating my grief came from other women who were further along in their journeys than I was. Because we learn about the stages of grief and, kind of clinically when we're in graduate school, and you're going to pass through these certain stages of, anger, disbelief or shock, and bargaining, acceptance, depression, but I think when you actually go through them and you have someone who's been through them too, you learn the nuances that, that really, I think, kind of surface, and that your grief is your journey. It's your process, your journey. And you might have other people telling you it needs to look a certain way. But I kept, there's one woman that I'm thinking of who I connected with at my college reunion. And I talk a little bit about her in my story in that article that I wrote because, her son was, I think, the first person who told me that I was pregnant with our son. And sadly, she has a story around loss that I will let her tell, but she was so just loving and open and grounded in letting me know that where I was at any given point was where I needed to be. And that was so affirming for somebody who supposedly has all of the answers, at least in this clinical sense, but I didn't. And I still think about her words, very early on in my loss, your grief, your journey, your process. And I repeat that repeatedly to people because it really is true. It really is true. I mean, we can have these, develop these, specific strategies for, managing different phases of the process, but it's going to look differently depending on the person. And, I had what I think is called more of a kind of a delayed reaction, partially because I think of the work that I did and needing to hold space for others and where some people were clinically that I had to kind of jump into really therapist mode and in a way that at times wasn't, in retrospect, healthy for me at the time, but, I, needed to make sure that my clients were okay. And then once they were okay, I was able to have create more space within my schedule to just decompress emotionally and figure out what ways that needed to look like and to know that it wasn't going to look pretty or graceful, but it was my process and my journey and how it needed to unfold. So, I think that was the biggest message and tool or resource that I got,
Yes, absolutely. So for the women who are listening to the podcast, if they have not started to seek therapy to help them in their grief journey, what would a first session or two look like with a grief therapist, one that specializes in pregnancy loss? What would it look like? Kind of take us through what those first couple sessions would look like.
So I think the first couple of sessions are they're going to look differently depending on where you're at. I typically see, women who are struggling with, their losses, they're in a very emotional space as you would expect. And I always just let them know it's okay to come as you are. So I would be looking for someone who's just affirming of where you're at and not trying to kind of mold you into being where you think you should be on the grief journey. So it could feel somewhat disjointed. And I do let people know that that is normal because part of getting to know somebody in this therapeutic process is, yes, we're asking a lot of questions, but initial stages of therapy are still about, just rapport building. So you're trying to get a sense of who you're working with, and we're trying to get a sense of who you are. But, I think any therapist who specializes in this is just going to allow you that space and to ask questions about what feels helpful to you right now and checking in, periodically, about how did a question sound, or how are you feeling about this process? And just planting that seed around, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be uncertain. This is what you could expect. But if you don't see this, that's okay too. Let's talk about it. So really presenting this sense of openness, and knowing that, things will take shape as they need to. But right now, feeling all over the place or just really, disorganized and disjointed is normal. This is not a normal experience. You're dealing with the unexpected and the unimaginable. So you can't have a plan that's going to be predictable, so to speak, and you have to learn how to pivot, which is a term that I've actually kind of, used a lot in therapy, because it really means that you might think you're going down one path, but because you're having some kind of emotional trigger or experience that you don't know how to make sense out of, you have to pivot in a different direction to figure that out. And that's okay. It's really okay. Every part of this is okay.
I love that. And then also you mentioned when you were going through your infertility battle, and you started IVF, that you made the switch to a different therapist. How do we know when it's the right time to make a switch based off of our transition or our situation with our journey to motherhood?
That's a great question, because I think sometimes, when we're, working on difficult things in the our process of therapy, and I think a lot of things can kind of play out where, we talk about countertransference or transference, and so clients might feel a little uncomfortable or what have you. But I really encourage clients and women who are listening to bring those questions back to your therapist. And I think because I had that skill set, I was able to talk really openly about, this just doesn't feel right to me. And so, she was able to share that, while she had a certain amount of experience, this was an area that wasn't her area of expertise. And so I really appreciated that. And I share that with clients too, because if something's outside of my scope and, and I don't know the answer, I'm like, I want you to get what you need. And so let's figure out how to get you there. So while I didn't necessarily need my therapist to help me do research to find another therapist, that is still one piece that I would encourage, your listeners to, feel empowered to do. Because we do, at least I feel like a good therapist will help you kind of think about, like, with the next therapist, this could be helpful, or maybe this technique or this theory, might benefit you because of X, Y, and Z. And then that way, you as a client, can make that decision for yourself, but also trusting your gut, and I think, we have a good sense sometimes when we have a good working relationship with someone, it feels easy, even if the topic area isn't easy. But I think that's one thing that I would tell your potential listeners about, just feeling empowered to, to listen to or check in with themselves about, what this doesn't feel right, and bringing it back to their therapist and, saying, I don't feel like I'm getting my needs met here, and seeing how they respond. Are they open or are they defensive? And are they open to talking about, or guiding you through what you might be needing differently to help you identify that or clarify, and so that when you move into the next process, you can be clearer in articulating that, what you need with the next therapist.
Awesome. That is, yes, exactly. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that that is definitely going to help other people. So, what encouraging words can you leave with our listeners as women are going through miscarriages and pregnancy loss and are seeking therapy? What encouraging words can you leave?
So I feel like, encouraging words, what was helpful for me was knowing that I wasn't alone, that even though I couldn't really see the forest through the trees, I needed a touchstone. And so I think finding your touchstone, having a strong sense of faith, which was really helpful for me, having women who were further along in their journey that were just so affirming, and having a community of women that were affirming was key. And, so as far as like different words, I feel like that changed depending on where I was in the journey. And even though I've had so many different losses and my grief journey has defined me in ways that I didn't even imagine, I still feel so much power in this, and knowing that there is a purpose that is larger than me. And I think that also helps me. And knowing that, I think intellectually, even though I wasn't in touch with that emotionally all the time, or maybe not as much as I wanted to be, it was a nice, I think, framework to go back to whenever I needed. And just knowing that, this is part of the plan, this is part of a provision. And I don't understand all of this right now, but, there is some message within this that I can learn from and that I can use in my own life. And I think that's also really informed me at this point because, in terms of giving back and feeling empowered to give back to other women. You don't have to have it figured out right now, and that's okay. But trust that this is your process and you will learn from it. And there are women here who are, just so willing and excited to hold that space for you and to be excited to be able to do that, after a long period of time.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Loree. So where can we find you and connect with you after this episode?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Loree Johnson, and that is GRLOREE, and Johnson, common spelling. And I'm on Instagram, and I also have a website online, which is www.drloreejohnson.com.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Loree, for sharing your story and your light. And for those of you who are in Southern California, definitely look her up if you're looking for a therapist.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. For show notes and more information on today's guest, go to sistersinloss.com. If you have not joined our online community, go to sistersinloss.com as well as sign up for our newsletter. We want you to be a part of the community so you can know all of the events that we have planned on as Sisters in Loss. Go to sistersinloss.com, sign up for our newsletter, join our online community, and stay connected with us. Talk to you soon.
Tired of your car insurance rate going up, even with a clean driving record? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.
We have the tech to get food delivered in 15 minutes, but we all have horror stories about buying tickets. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage. Get amazing tickets in just a few taps. Fees are included, so what you see is what you pay. And the Game Time Guarantee means authentic tickets at the best price every time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to concerts, sports, comedy, and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.
Want to instantly elevate your hosting this season? Tea Forte makes it feel effortless. Known for their signature pyramid teas topped with the iconic leaf, Tea Forte elevates everything from a casual brunch to a summer dinner party. And when you need a thoughtful gift, their tea chests and curated gift sets are absolutely gorgeous. No wrapping required. Perfect for birthdays, bridal showers, thank you gifts, and celebrating life's everyday moments. Tea Forte feels luxurious, personal, and genuinely memorable every single time. Shop now at teaforte.com or on Amazon.